Hello, I'm Chris Slisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore concepts that allow us to broaden our view of the world. You'll hear interesting topics, meet fascinating guests, and discover who you really are. Using the time-tested practices of astrology, you'll learn how to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Astrology, art, and spiritual adventure on Turning of the Wheel TV with Chris Slisher. Hello, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name's Chris Slisher. You know this is a show about astrology. And today I'm going to be discussing the logic of astrology. And the reason I'm discussing this as a topic is because many people come to me as an astrologer, which I am. There's my website. Many people come to me as an astrologer and say, you know, why does astrology work? I mean, come on, really. We're all born in a different time and place. What are you talking about? How can this possibly be the case? I'm going to go into some of the explanation about why it works. It is a remarkable divination tool that is incredibly accurate and can give you incredible insights into who you are as an individual. It's based on the birth date, the birthplace, and most specifically the birth time of you, an individual. Now, many people, almost everybody in the world knows their astrology sign. There's a statistic I read somewhere that says about 98% of the people in the world understand their astrology sign, know their astrology sign. And not everybody subscribes to it, but even though they may secretly go and look up their sign each day and read what's going on, they may not openly acknowledge it because they don't want to appear to be, you know, weird or believing in something that they can't quite understand or can't quite get their logical head around. But the reason that is interesting, I think, is because in the fact that everybody who does know that, what they're reading in the newspapers typically is a very general, broad overview picture of what astrology is about. And the reason this is unusual, and this happened back in the 1920s when popular astrology first began to get into the public media. It got into the public media back in the 20s, and astrologers back at the time, would write about Capricorn and Pisces and Virgo, each individual sign on an individual day. And people would read it with a certain amount of curiosity, and they'd say, you know, that's good and well, it's all kind of broad, it's all kind of general, but it doesn't really speak to the specifics of who I am as an individual. People want specific information. Not all Virgos, not all Pisces, not all Geminis are going to win the lottery, or not all of them are going to have a wonderful day every day. You can't imagine everybody on the globe who's born at a certain time having having the same day. It's just mathematically impossible. And this is where astrology becomes more and more complicated and sort of gets the dust off in some ways, because it doesn't have the granularity. What we want is granularity. The reason it works when people come to see me as a counselor, and they visit me at my website, turningthewheel.com. When they come to visit me and they speak to me as a counselor, I get specific information about who they are. I get not only their birthday, I get their birth time, which is incredibly important, as well as the birthplace. When we know those three data points, we're able to construct a chart that brings us into a much finer detail. We get more empirical data of that individual. With more empirical data, we are able to paint a much broader picture. I have incredible experiences with clients over the years that I've been an astrologer, people having amazing aha moments of like, wow, how did you possibly know that? How could this possibly be? What is it like? How can astrology possibly work? But then, when I start reading the facts to them, I start telling them about their individual characteristics, and they don't know me from a hole in the wall, and I don't know them from a hole in the wall. All of a sudden, they're now saying, you know me like somebody who's known me all my life, or you know me almost as well as I know myself. This kind of a revelation is remarkable. It's very much like what real, true psychology is like. It's like the amazing understanding. However, I would argue that in astrology, you get to know the individual far faster with an astrology reading than you would if you spent months and years and time at any psychotherapist. Sorry, I'm not putting psychotherapy down. A lot of my good friends are psychotherapists. Interestingly enough, a lot of psychotherapists come to see me as an astrologer to understand the nature of human character and to understand the certain propensities people have and ideas people have and attributes and characteristics and habits and foibles. You know, certain foibles are weird character traits that we see with each of the individual signs. logic of astrology is perhaps best summarized by the words of Carl Jung. Carl Jung was a very famous psychologist, speaking of psychologists, and he traveled the world and did a great deal of studying about astrology in order to understand what the real logic of it was. And in his travels, he went to China, he saw the way the Chinese did astrology. He went to India, he saw the way the Indians do astrology. He went to other parts of Tibet, excuse me, other parts of the world, and was able to come up with a comprehensive idea and sort of an explanation. Now, the explanation is fairly trite in some ways. I like to use that word when I'm talking about astrology, but I think it's sort of an overarching idea that'll give you what I'm referring to. He used the analogy of a grape. Now, I know that sounds odd, but the analogy of a grape is a grape on a vine in a vineyard. The grape on the vineyard each year is different. Each day is different, and depending upon when they harvest those grapes. The vintner has to know when to harvest those grapes to get the maximum potential out of those grapes. So, using that analogy, we think of ourselves as grape on a vine, where every day the climate changes, the air temperature changes, the amount of sunlight changes, the soil in the earth changes, the atmosphere changes. Many different characteristics are involved in that particular place and time. It's what makes some wines fabulous and known for their quality, and other wines not so good. We all hear people who are involved with wines always talking about, oh, it's been a good year, such and such was a very good year, such and such was a bad year. That doesn't mean people born at those times are good or bad. It just is the overarching idea of a place in time. The grape is a place in time. You could take that same grape the very next year on a different day and get a completely different wine, tasting differently. That is the idea, the underlying illustration I want to use as the logic for astrology, okay? So, when we are born at that moment in time, when we come out of the womb, boom, we're born at that moment in time, we have unique characteristics. Now, people always come to me and they say, how can this possibly be true? It doesn't make sense. You know, I read different things in my astrology chart and it just doesn't make sense. However, if you seek out a professional astrology reading with a professional astrologer such as myself, you would see the granularities there. You'd see all of the different planets, because at the time that we're born, all those planets, the ones that are behind me there, on both sides of me here, all those planets fall into place at a certain time, and they fall into a certain part of the chart, and they imbue the personality with that. Now, it's not as if some magic beam comes floating out of the sky and impregnates us with those kinds of ideas. No, that's not how it works. The way it works is that because we're born at this place in time, we are part of a continuum, a long stream, a river of time that continues on just as history does. We hear about that term, history repeating itself. We have this cyclical nature of astrology going around and around. There's this wheel that goes around. Every March it turns into Aries and goes on to Taurus, and then Gemini and Cancer and Leo, Virgo, and so on. Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, the whole realm, the 12 signs. I've only got 10 fingers, but you know what I mean. The 12 signs in the 12 months of the year. The logic is there, and that's how long it takes for the Earth to rotate around the world. So our placement in that is different each time. But at the same time that the Earth is circling the sun, going through the changes of the season, the whole universe, our whole solar system, is moving at the same time. So we are literally in a different place in time each time we go through that cycle. So yes, astrology is a cyclical construct, a cyclical divination tool, a observation of the cycles of time. But at the same time that it's going around, it's also going forward. And so we have this process of going forward. What that means is that even though we're going around, we're going forward at the same time. Meaning that when March 20th comes around next year, we're going to be in a different place than we were the March before. However, there will be certain cycles that will remain. The sun will be in the same spot. We have what's called a solar return. When we have a solar return, which is the day and time when the sun is at the exact same degree at which you were born, on the day that you were born. Now that can vary by a day or two, depending upon the cycles and the planet and the motion of the Earth. So if your birthday is on March 13th, your solar return may be March 12th, March 13th, or March 14th. That doesn't mean that your birthday isn't the same as you always express it to be. But in order for the sun to be at the exact same degree that it was when you were born, say it was 7 degrees, whatever the sign you're in order for that to be at the exact same degree, that is considered your solar return. It's a significant period in the timing of your life, because if you were to cast a chart for that time and place, if you were to cast a chart for that day, that year, supposing you're 22 years old and your solar returns happens on the day before your birthday, that is a snapshot, an indication of what your year will be like coming forward. It's incredibly valuable. The solar return reading is one of the best readings that I do on my, from whenever you contact me. And you can contact me from my website, turningofthewheel.com is my website, or chrisflisher.com. Both of those will get you there at the same time. By the way, I am on YouTube, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter. You can contact me there. I also do a weekly newsletter which goes into each of the individual signs. And when I send out my newsletter, I always encourage people to read at least two data points in any of the readings that I send out. So each week I'll send out a list for all of the a paragraph or so for each of the individual signs. I encourage you to read your sun sign and your rising sign. Your rising sign is based on the time that you were born. This is part of how the logic of astrology works. So many people say, well, okay, I get my time. On my website, there's what's called a rising sign calculator. If you go, there's my website, turningofthewheel.com. If you go there, or chrisflisher.com will get you to the same spot. If you go there, you enter in your birthday, your birthplace, and your birth time, you will get your rising sign. Your rising sign is where the sun was on the horizon at the moment you were born, okay? And that varies by person. Everybody thinks that they're in Aries or whatever. I'm in Aries, but I've got Virgo rising, okay? So I would always read Aries and Virgo each week. I will always understand, I'll always study those, because those are the two that I know are the most important. After all, it's all about time, right? Just like the egg timer, the timekeeper here. Even though it's different, it is all about time. And if we think of it in very sort of metaphysical terms, spiritual terms, the idea of the river is a very good analogy for astrology in some ways, because the river is constantly moving, right? We don't want to go up the stream, we want to go with the stream. So in order to know what's happening in your life, getting the granularity of the individual astrology chart, the precision is what gives you the predictive quality in astrology. Let me repeat that. It is the precision of the individual's astrology chart, meaning the granular aspects, the precise degrees and angles that are there. That is what gives the individual, the astrologer such as myself, the predictive ability to see where you're going to see your upswings in your year or your day, your downswings in your day. And many of the things that we happen in our lives are not necessarily tied to any particular day. They're more tied to a broader based themes where you'll see the action take course over the course of a year or someplace. But you want to be in the right place at the right time. Nothing is worse than being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I mean, in the right place at the right time, we all know what that's like. And when you're there, you have incredible ability to manage your life and adjust and act accordingly at the time that you were there. This is incredibly important. Knowing where you are in your particular life, on your journey, which room you're entering into, which house you're entering into, and I'm going to be getting into the houses later, further on down the road with other shows and other segments, so you'll know what I'm talking about. When we get into those individual areas of our lives, we can see where we are supposed to be. It's incredibly validating. I had a client that called me up the other day, a young woman who's studying, and I looked at her chart and I said, wow, you're really going through some difficult times. This is an unusual time for her. And you can't sugarcoat these things. You want to be honest. But my logic to her and my commentary to her was that, okay, fine, you're going through a difficult time. Yes, I understand that. Everybody goes through difficult times. But without the rain, we don't have the sun. This is the whole dualistic quality of life. We have to have the balance of the yin and the yang, the positive and the negative. We are dualistic characters. We have two arms, we have two eyes, we've got two lungs, we've got two legs, two ears. All of these things are part of the dualistic nature of man. This goes back as far as mythology. You know, the ancient Greeks were very cognizant of this because we could see the polarities in there. They'd have the good and the evil always in this Greek mythology. And it almost seems as if we're reliving the same cyclical story that was told years and years ago. The same stories that were told in mythology have simply been retold in a new contemporary world. We see what happened to the Greek gods. We see those same things happening to us now. There's not a movie today that isn't based on some sort of epic search, you know, sort of the great quest, you know, the Odyssey. We're all in a sense of a sense of a great journey, an Odyssey. What changes is, as I said, is that moving down the road further. So the theme is there, but the time has changed. This is where astrology works. So what an astrologer will do is based on the logic of the individual's birthplace. That individual birthplace is just like a fingerprint. It's like your DNA. It's part of who your structure is. And your structure, as you know, goes back centuries through, and you can have your DNA traced from where you came from. There's many services out there that do that. But when you know when you're born, and your time and your place are there, and you begin to collate those pieces of the puzzle, you will begin to see what it is that makes you tick. And you will find the validation for when you have problems and when things were good. You'll see why relationships work and why they don't work. Very, very critical. And you really want to be, ultimately, all of us want to be in a relationship that's successful and happy. So we want to be in a spot with someone who's compatible with us. And that can be a challenge. Obviously, we've seen challenges. And many of us get divorced. Many of us have relationships that are wonderful. Many of us have relationships that are quite difficult. In that structure, in that association, in that relationship of two people together, we see two different astrology charts, two different astrology profiles. This is, again, part of the logic of astrology. Two different areas, two different entities coming together. So we have an A entity and a B entity. They come together and they form a whole new entity, a C entity, so to speak, because it's now a composite of two different people. That takes on an environment and characteristics all its own, all of their own. If you want more information on this, the best thing to do is to contact me at my website, turningofthewheel.com, or, as I said, chrisflusher.com. When you reach out and get an individualized astrological reading from me, and I can start to talk about ideas, very, very helpful for career planning, for relationships, for timing, for career aspirations. It's phenomenal. Should I be going back to school? Should I be pursuing a new job? Am I ready to look for a new job? Is the time right for a new job? Is the time right for a new relationship? Should I stay with somebody? Despite how difficult life may be for people, much of that, all of that, I would argue, can be explained by the layout of the mathematical proportions of the astrology chart. When we see where the action is, where we see where the individual players are in your field of your life, because your life is basically a play, okay? Some people have easy plays and they have a happy ending and they sail off into the sunset and everything's wonderful. Other people's lives are filled with hardship and disappointment. Now, I would argue that most people have a combination of the both. We probably always have, we have good moments and we have bad moments. That's not uncommon. And thankfully so. If we had every day was sunny, we would not know, we would get bored with it. We would become complacent. We'd become apathetic in some ways, lethargic. Oh gee, it's sunny today. Another sunny day. What are we going to do? Oh, we can't go outside because the sun's too bright. Well, thankfully, it comes along and it rains in most of our lives, and that rain is a metaphor, a symbolic metaphor for the disparity of this duality, this composite attribute, the reflective quality of two different types of energies, the positive and the negative. Now, I would say that the astrology chart is very much like an owner's manual. When you buy a computer, when you buy a car, you buy a lawnmower, you buy a motorcycle, whatever you buy, it comes with a manual. In that manual, it tells you how to operate that vehicle or that device. The astrology reading and the astrology profile that I can construct for you does exactly that. It says, this is how Bill and Jane operate. This is how Bill operates. This is how Jane operates. Do Bill and Jane go together? They may go together. They may love each other. They've got problems. Everybody has problems. life is difficult. How you mitigate that, how you manage that, how you operate within that realm, how you maximize that, how you springboard and launch off that difficulty is the secret to what makes people successful. There's not a single person famous who's in the world who is not in some capacity filled with difficult aspects in their chart. Difficult aspects are a concept that I'll get into further down the road in an episode, but it's language that astrologers use to express the relationship of the planets in your chart. When your chart is done out, there's planets that are different angles, and that relationship of the angles is exactly what determines the physical and the mental and the emotional characteristics of the individual. When we know that, we can identify the strengths and the weakness. Now, everybody's chart has difficult characteristics. When I open up a chart and I show them to somebody, they always laugh and they say, oh my gosh, what are all those squares? What are all those triangles? Well, the squares are difficult, the triangles are easy. Each life is filled with challenges. And I would argue that it's through those challenges that we actually grow. We grow through hardship. Believe it or not, that is exactly right. If we were sitting on our sofas every day and watching TV and just with our feet up and everything's hunky-dory, everything is provided for, we would get nowhere. How many of us have seen this happen with people who've won the lottery? Good example. Everybody may think, I can't wait to win the lottery. If I win the lottery, I'm going to change my life. Yes, your life will become different, but will it become better? This is a great question. We just, the Powerball is a huge thing. We saw people winning millions and billions of dollars, and yet their lives are going to change because the drive, their natural, inbred, humanistic, born characteristic drive is going to be suppressed because money is no longer part of it. In some ways, they are jilting the system, okay? Because they've won through a random set of circumstances. Most people who do win that situation, who come into great wealth, don't live lives that are very happy because the drive is gone. They sort of are betraying. It's a real betrayal of their own human characteristics, their own human potential. And what I think is interesting about this is that we often see people who were, because environment and circumstances and influences from outside people also impact the astrology of the individual. People may be born a certain way, but if you've got a father telling you you're going to go to law school, and you don't want to go to law school, you're going to have a bit of a headbutt. And I've actually had situations like that. I had a client once who was a lawyer. His father was a lawyer, his uncle was a lawyer, the whole family was a lawyer. We're lawyers. So the father says, son, you're going to law school. So he sends him off to law school. The son does great, gets a job in a law firm, does all that is asked of him, because he's a very hard-working, methodical kind of individual who likes to get things done. Goes through all the motions of what society deems as correct and what his family deemed as correct, and said, okay, Dad, I'll do all the things I'm supposed to do. He went through law school, and when he got out and went to work, he was incredibly dissatisfied, heartbroken, feeling ill, not right with himself, felt totally out of sorts, could not even focus. He was successful for some time because he was a hard worker. He was a Capricorn, I believe, so he had a good, strong work ethic, was doing the right thing, was out there blazing trails and doing all the right things. But at the end of the day, he was unhappy with himself. He felt something was missing. So he contacted me. I did a personal astrology reading for him. And I said, gosh, you don't look like a lawyer at all. How did you get involved with this? And he says, well, my father, really wanted me. It's sort of a family thing. It's sort of, it's assumed that I'm going to be this. This is sort of carrying on the family name. Now, what he really wanted to do, I asked him, I said, I could see this in his chart. I could see, wow, you got a lot of stuff going on in your fifth house. Fifth house is creativity. And it's in Capricorn. I think, wow. And Taurus was there, and Virgo was very prominently placed. 3 earth signs. I said, something? I think you'd be much better off working with your hands. And his eyes lit up. And I could hear him on the other side of the Skype screen where I was talking to him. And he said, how did you know that? And I said, I could see it in your chart. It was right there, clear as day. He says, what I want to be is a potter. I said, oh my God, You want to be a potter? You mean work with clay on your hands? He says, yes, that's all I've ever wanted to do. I love it. I took a class at a community education class session last summer, fell in love with it. I can't get away from it. It's all I want to do. And I said, you know something? That's what you should be doing. That's what this universe wants you to do. Not just what I thought he should do, not just what he felt he should do. It's what the astrology chart was telling him to do. This is where career and logic and timing all come into play. We are placed on this planet at a certain point in time to fulfill a certain task. That task is our owner's manual, and when we go against the rules of the owner's manual, when we don't drive that car the right way, something breaks. If we don't run that computer the right way, according to the manual, it breaks. If we have a lawnmower and we don't put gas in it like the manual says, guess what? It doesn't work. So when you have the owner's manual and you follow the owner's manual, which is the astrology chart, the astrology reading, the individual personal profile of who you are, when you have that and you can see what you're supposed to be doing, you are in line with destiny, you are in line with what the universe has in store for you, and you will find everything begins to click. And you'll feel this, he felt this enormous weight lifted off of him. Of course, he had to deal with his father and the student loans from law school. But I said, you better start making those pots because you got a lot of law school bills to pay back. And he laughed, but I know that he's a successful potter right now with his own shop somewhere. I think it's up in Maine. And he's making pottery, and he's having a time of his life. And I heard from him, this is the first time I talked to him about 3 or 4 years ago. I heard from him a couple of years ago, and he said, thank you, Chris. I've never been happier in my life. This was what I was supposed to do. So my response, of course, was, what did your father say? And he said, well, my father thinks I should, go work for a corporation that makes coffee mugs and be their lawyer. Perfect combination of the two, which sounds like what the father would say. It makes perfect sense. But ultimately, what he really wanted to do was to be a potter, and that's what he was. So this illustrates the logic of timing and placement in a person's life. When we know that, and this is based on the birth date, place, and time, so that when I send out my newsletter each week, and you read and you know more information about yourself, supposing you're a Capricorn with a Scorpio rising and an Aries moon, you're going to read Capricorn, you're going to read Scorpio, and you're going to read Aries. You put those three together, and that's where you're going to be in your life at that time. When you know, this will teach you when to hold and when to fold. And this is exactly precise. Contact me at turningofthewheel.com. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on YouTube, I'm on a number of places as well as here. And I also have a podcast on iTunes called Turning of the Wheel, where I discuss these topics with many of the world's famous astrologers. There's probably not a single astrologer who's well known in the world that I have not interviewed at some point in time with regard to this and about this topic. So I've had numerous conversations about astrology over the years. My knowledge is deep, my expertise is deep. I'm an empathetic person. I understand the foibles and the ups and downs of life. I can help you if you're willing to take a chance. And it doesn't take much. There's not much difference between the faith of astrology and the faith of a religion. They're both sort of untouchable intangibles. But I encourage you to contact me. I think you'll find astrology and the logic of the universe as it applies to you is right on time. Chris at chrisflisher.com, turningofthewheel.com. Contact me.